Welcome. So in today's video, we are going to learn about the working of the human eye. We will confine ourselves to the working of these two parts, iris and pupil. We'll see how these two parts work in tandem with each other. What this video is not about. This video is not about the lens, the image processing, the retina, the nerve cells and so on. Again, what is this video all about? It's about iris and pupil and how these two parts work in tandem with each other. Let us understand let us see how the eye looks. This sketch that you can see has this blue portion. It's called the iris. You would have heard about bluish eyes or brownish eyes. Well, the color of the eye is determined by this part called the iris. In this case, we have bluish eyes. The other part of the eye that we are going to learn about today is the pupil. It is that small black circle that you can see at the center of the eye. The center of the eye is pupil, and this is that part of the eye through which the light enters our eyes. Let us now understand the arrangement. For an image to be visible to us, some light needs to enter our eyes. Pupil is that part through which this light enters. What is also interesting and very important is that not the same intensity light is required for image processing all the time. When the room that you are in is brightly lit, or you are outside when it is very sunny, clear skies, then it is brightly lit obviously, and therefore the pupil size is small at that time. What do we mean by the pupil size is small? This is where the iris works in tandem with it. The iris works like a curtain, and it contracts in such a way or expands in such a way that it exposes only so much that the pupil needs. Coming to the case when it was brightly lit, at this time the human eye needs very little light to process the image, to have a very clear and a nice image of the object to present to our eyes, and therefore the pupil size needs to be small at this time. And here is where the iris expands itself in such a way that it lets a very small portion of the pupil to be exposed to light. What happens when it is relatively dim or shadowy or dark? At this time, the eyes need some more light to process the image clearly. Well, it's just falling short, and therefore it needs more light. What does the iris do at that time? The iris, it makes way, it allows the pupil, a larger area of the pupil, to be exposed to the light, and therefore the pupil is then able to take in more light. How does it happen? The iris makes way for the pupil. It's such like the curtain which is taken off. The curtain takes off and the pupil size grows, and therefore it can take in more light. Let us understand this with the help of a tap, a water tap example. Let us take this tap in which water is flowing out at a high pressure. In fact, it's so high that you are having to turn the knob off a little to make sure that water does not splash onto you or the basin or the floor. It is a similar case to that of a brightly lit setup. Here is where you turn the knob off to the extent that the water force or the pressure is just about appropriate. Similar to the iris, you turn the knob off to an extent that you get enough or just enough water, and the water pressure is not high. So also the iris makes adjustments so that there is only a small portion of the pupil that gets exposed to light. On the other hand, look at this tap just struggling. No matter how much knob you turn on, there is very little water that draws out. And what do you do in such a case? You keep turning the knob on and on to the maximum in the hope that some more water will draw out of it. This is exactly the case when it is very dim. what does the iris do in such a situation? The iris lets more of the pupil to get exposed to the light. This is how iris and pupil work in tandem. One very interesting and a very important aspect of iris and pupil and the setup that we have understood is when you are in a brightly lit room. Let's say a party is going on and it's very brightly lit, and suddenly the light turns off. There's a power failure, let's say, and the light turns off. Momentarily, you see that everything is dark. You just can't see anything around momentarily. And why is that? But after some time, you would find that you get some idea or some outline at least of objects and people around. What has really happened? At the time when the party was going on, well, the party is still going on, but at the time when it was brightly lit, your pupil size was only very small. The iris was allowing only a small part of the pupil to get exposed to the light. But when the light turned off, the pupil and the iris both were caught by surprise momentarily. Now, the pupil size is still small, but now there is no light, and therefore there is very little, literally no light that is entering the human eye, and therefore everything is dark. The iris senses that. It knows that it needs to make some adjustment. It needs to allow the pupil to get some more light, and therefore it makes way for it. And in some time, it could be 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 seconds later, you start getting to see some outlines, some images, some people around, even though the light was not turned on. On the other hand, let's say you are sitting in a dark room. It's very dark and you are in the dark. Well, you're not in the dark, but it's a very dark room that you are sitting in. And then suddenly somebody turns on a very high intensity light on. What happens? You are dazzled. What has really happened in this case? In this case, when you were sitting in the dark, were in the dark room, then your pupil size was excessively large, the maximum it could be, so that it could get some light at least. But at that time, somebody turned on the light and your pupil, the pupil of your eye, was in an expanded state, and therefore it was caught by surprise again. This time, a lot of light and high intensity light hit the pupil. Thereby, a lot of this light got into the eye, which made things uneasy. The iris comes into play once again. It feels the need for the adjustment because the pupil size needs to contract here because the intensity of light has gone up, and that's where the iris comes in. It makes adjustments such that the pupil size gets smaller so that less light can get in. And now after some moment, it could be after 5 or 7 or 10 seconds, even though the intensity of light is the same as it was when the light turned on, you feel relatively more comfortable, not as dazzled. This is how iris and pupil work in tandem to make this world beautiful. Thanks for watching.